Welcome to the Tuning In podcast, where we talk alignment, intuition, and our internal guidance system. We cover woo-woo topics in an approachable and practical way. I'm your host, Dana Evans of Alignful.com.
We're on the record.
Woo, woo, woo. Here we are. All right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tuning In podcast. I am your host, Dana Evans. And today I have a special guest, the one, the only, the spiritual investor, Elizabeth Ralph. And you may recognize her or her voice, certainly, because she's definitely been on the podcast before. And Elizabeth, your podcasts always perform really well. People like when you're on the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah. So she's back. And I actually think it's really interesting because I didn't know I was going to have her on the podcast for this week. And this is my second episode of 2023. But last week's episode, I told this whole story, finally, the whole story of me starting to take horseback riding lessons. So if anyone hasn't listened, listen to that. And I talked about how my inner voice guided me into it and I followed it. Well, what I didn't talk about is that Elizabeth has been my horse inspiration ever since I've met her. And so behind the scenes, every time I have a new milestone, every time, from the very first lesson, I was messaging Elizabeth. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to tell you. And she's been so supportive. So I appreciate that, Elizabeth. But she has, I'll have you talk about this a little bit more as it relates to what we're talking about today. But Elizabeth has a really beautiful story and mission as it relates to horses. And it's part of what inspired me when she first opened her money program years ago. And I was a beta member, what's now the spiritual investor. She told this beautiful story of her why. And it was all related to the horses. And my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, to have such a compelling reason to expand your wealth, to expand your money, it really spoke to me. And watching her stories, you'll always see Elizabeth on her ranch with Bailey, her sweet horse, and other animals. And it just shows you how connected to source we are. And source being animals, source being spirit, source being nature, but also source being money. And I think, Elizabeth, you're such a beautiful example of all of that. And so I'm so excited to have you on today and to have you talk about all of this as it relates to one another, and then talk about a little a workshop that you have coming up that people can join.
Oh, thank you so much. Wow, you said it so beautifully, but you're right. It's kind of all the same thing, isn't it? Like the spirit of the horse, money, our own joy, our own flow. Like you followed it, your intuition guided you there. And just even the joy in you when you send those messages and you're like, even when the horse took off on you or whatever, you were still like, okay, this is great. This is great. And you've continued to just push forward with it,
Yeah.
Which is absolutely amazing. And you've done the same thing with money. And you know what I love about your money journey is that you've done it in your own custom way, which, even the question that you kind of asked me before we started this, it's kind of like, I love how you approach life and it's like your version, but you're kind of weaving in the standard things, but it's always your flavor around it.
Yeah. And that's one thing I really love. And I think there's a human design aspect there, but I love to learn and I love to watch people. I learn very well. I'm external vision. If we talk human design, I learn very well by watching and then being like, I want that. I want that. I don't want that. I want to try that on. And so, one thing that I feel with you is I get to watch how you operate, and being in your, not just your program, but your back end membership. I'm like, oh, what's Elizabeth doing? How does she see this? And it teaches me so much. And then you always make money feel so easy that I like to be in your energy and your essence, because by watching you have an easy relationship with money, it's helped me so much change my relationship and viewpoint of money.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm so glad, um feeling at ease with money, as you know, like that is the greatest opening to money. Money neutrality is the greatest opening to money. And I was just talking about this yesterday with, like, one of there's many reasons why money neutrality, that band of neutrality, is the opening, but one of the things is that, like, if you think of it like a wave spectrum, like the emotions of our past are contained in that higher and lower wave spectrum, right? And so the neutral point is like the letting go of all of our past emotions with money. And so that's also why it's the greatest opening, because that's also why you're going to see and be able to have like the clearest decision. And that's where you feel the most at ease with money. And you learn this because money's a practice. You learn this with certain things, as you've known, like you kind of started, remember at first conversation, we talked about products, you kind of started with that. And then you learn how to find neutrality about one thing, and then you can kind of weave into other things to the point where you're going to just operate in money neutrality, the majority of the time, no matter what's going on.
Yeah. And how would you describe money neutrality? So, for someone listening, they hear you saying this term and they're like, well, what the heck does that mean? Because for me, money might be a very big trigger. It is
Mhm.
anything but neutral. So, how would you define it? Let's start
Mhm.
there and then we can kind of go further.
Well, I think the best way to define just anything is, can you explain? Can you give someone an example that creates the feeling in their body? Because, like, I think that we've sort of moved beyond like the conceptual meaning of life, and we're more moving into this frequency, because money is a frequency. And so if I were to describe it in terms of a feeling, I would say, think of an amount. And okay, so we'll just ask you this. So think of an amount of money in your mind that you could make every month, and it's just like a no-brainer, like almost like silly to talk about it. It's so easy.
Oh, so easy. Okay. $100 a month.
Yeah. Okay. So easy. It's almost like, why are we even talking about this, right? Well, you have a lot of neutrality around that, but someone that lives in a third world country that makes $1 a day would not have that same neutrality about it, right? They wouldn't. They would be on a different part of the spectrum. Now, what if I said, "Is it easy to make $100,000 a month?" What comes up for you?
My mind says, I wish.
Yeah, see? I wish, which effectively means I can't, and then
Mhm.
how, and then, oh my God, that takes all this work, and oh my God, the sacrifices. A cascade of emotions will come down if we took the time to track those, right? So that is the feeling of money neutrality that you're going after. So when something is neutral and it's not a big deal to you, then you're able to actually, instead of having split energy when you go into something like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? And all of that, you're able to actually focus your full attention on whatever it is that you're doing. It's almost like, think of it like your relationship with your money then becomes like that most important person in the room that you're looking at, and nothing else exists around you. And when you bring that power to money, because abundance is energy and it flows to you and it flows to me, there's two sides of it, right? There is like the allowing more money, which partly is receiving, and then there's the giving money, right? So what it does is it allows that energy to be clean and to not be interrupted, which is the greatest opening to money.
Yeah. So do you find, and that makes sense. And like for those listening, you're so good about speaking to emotions as well. And when we talk about the emotional wave,
Mm.
there's the high point, there's a low point of the wave. Like the high point is like, oh my God, this is so exciting. The low point might be like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to figure it out. And then there's the in between. And so I think that's such a good visual is if you're in a storm of emotion, if you feel spiked or charged in any way, it's a good indicator that you're not in neutrality.
Yeah.
So to be able to tell when you're not in it also then helps you to tell when you are in it, because that stillness, that calmness, that peace, that ease
Mhm.
are all like deeper than the charge. They're deeper than that emotional wave. And then you can feel that calmness. It's like, oh, then this has been such a learning process for me is I can find it sometimes, but then what does it take to start to spread that feeling across the board in your
Mhm.
relationship to money?
Well, I think the first thing is not expecting that it will like either look the same or maybe it won't spread across the board at first because maybe there are things that are too charged. What we do is we blame money for so much. Because the thing is, if you're not in emotional neutrality in other areas of your life, it's going to be difficult to be in money neutrality. So if you find that there is something in your life, like a lot of people feel scarcity around money, they feel fear. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't pay the bills or something. Like you can't tell someone like that, oh, just be neutral, right? What you have to do is you have to like go down the rabbit hole of, well, what's causing that? What's the emotion behind it? And how can I start to clear that up in order to get, because you can't talk yourself into money neutrality. But the key is when you get into money neutrality, it's that frequency that you want to be in if you want to call in more, which is why I always say money's a practice, not something that you do.
Oh, I love that. So we don't have to like trick ourselves.
Mm-mm.
And we can't really trick ourselves because it's that deeper, that vibrational experience internally. Because we all know that experience of when you're like, I'm rich, I'm wealthy, I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, I'm rich. And you're saying that in your head. But meanwhile, your body's like, oh my God, I'm so afraid I'm never going to make another dollar again. And you're like panicked. Or like, I can't invest any money because it's not safe. Right. And I have to hoard all of my money in one space.
Exactly. And, I think that there's a lot of information out there with people like, let go of your money blocks and let's talk about your limited beliefs and all that. Well, you can let go of 100 limited beliefs with money, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to change your frequency of money. That's the key.
Ooh, oh, that's so good. And when it comes to money frequency, I see this in you and I want to hear you talk about it. Like when I look around at the normal financial world or the more typical financial world, that's not something you hear addressed. And it
Mm.
very much it, it very much feels like an elite world that not everyone has access to. But when you talk about money, even large amounts of money, the way you vibrate and the frequency you bring to money makes it feel like it's something that everyone can access. So, how do you see your approach to money and investing and financing and frequency? How is that different than our traditional stock market, all that type of work?
Yeah. Well, I'll just start with kind of like what you began with, which is like, okay, here we have this financial world, right? Which can feel like cold and isolating and all of that. To be fair to the financial world, like it was just born that way. Like it was that's our parents had to go to a financial advisor and it was everything was kept behind a veil. So we almost like let go of our thoughts about that because now the financial world there's no relevance to that. Now you can go buy a stock online, but we still have this old conditioning that we're dragging in from that, right? So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is that the financial world, even the modern version where we have all the robo advisors and we have fintech and all this stuff, it still to a certain degree is going to feel cold because the financial world doesn't have an inundation of consciousness yet. So you can go to a spiritual community and you can feel that vibration and you can feel that comfort and you can lean into that. We don't yet have that. So the difference in what I teach and the way that I operate with money myself and always have is I'm very much emerging of these worlds because I don't see them as separate. Like my wealth going from my early 30s into, retiring at 39 with financial freedom, I would not have been able to do that if I was just speaking spreadsheet language. I wouldn't have been able, like, I had to have my strong why. I had to have my spiritual journey. I had to have my value system. It all had to come in there. And because it was a merging effect, when I decided that I was going to start teaching people money and how to actually do this, there was no way that I could separate the two. So the way that I'm teaching this is literally the way it's flowing through. It's not even a choice, honestly.
And do you see that it's like, is that the next wave? Is that going to rise up as more and more people having that relationship with money and spirituality?
I think so. I think that people are going to start allowing money to come into their world, because I think it's already begun in terms of people. Most people will say, yes, money is energy, but it's still at the conceptual level with most people. They'll say that, but then they'll feel like shit when they go to the grocery store and the credit card bill is $20 higher than it usually is. So there's a disconnect there. So I do think that what we're moving into is more of like an embodiment of that concept. And that's kind of where the money is practice thing comes in. Because if you are feeling that way at the grocery store, there's nothing wrong with it. But what you have to realize is that it's not, when we talk about money frequency, it's not like you get to be on that frequency and it's like all of a sudden like you're on a roller coaster and like you just get to be on that. You get thrown on and off of it, right? And so what the universe is looking for is, are you consistently, like energetic consistency is what I call it, on that vibration? So if you're having all of these events, these triggers almost that are coming up in your day, that are causing you to go, that's expensive, or don't break that, I have to rebuy that. Like all these little things that seem trivial is basically knocking you off of that frequency. So then I think what we're moving towards is that people are more and more curious about, how can I actually be on that? And the way we started this conversation was feeling ease with money. And most people are finally desiring that.
I love that. I've heard you say a few things. So, do you, is our languaging around money really important? Because you made a couple mentions there. I'm like, oh, we haven't really talked about that.
Yeah.
How we talk about money, how we speak to it and with it in the moment. Is that
Yes.
important as part of this process?
Very important. Just like, if someone were to call you a bad word,
Mm.
that carries a charge, a lot of energy, right? And you might be like, oh no, oh, that's a hell no, right? Don't call me that, right? Well, that's an extreme example, but there's a mini version of that going on inside of you at a subconscious level, when words like expensive, or when you start to feel like maybe something will be taken away from you, or all of that stuff is being energetically woven in to project out your frequency.
Wow. So what expensive I think is like a very common word, right? We hear that, say it
Mhm.
all the time. How, what do we say instead? Like if I look at something and I'm like, man, that's too expensive, right?
Mhm.
That would be a phrase. If I wanted to start subtly shifting my language around money, what could I say instead?
Well, you could do one of two things. You could, if you had if you had a lot of awareness around it, then when you said the word, you could actually mentally attach a different label to it. So, do you know what I mean? Like, we're actually, here's the funny thing is that we're actually not interacting with the things in life, we're interacting with the labels. And so, if you could actually change your interaction to that label, then you could still use that word. If you find that difficult to do, then what you could do is you could future you could sort of future tense it with like, okay, well, at some point I will be getting that. Or, that's just not comparable to me right now. Like something like, you know what I'm saying? Like something where it's a little bit more open ended and it's not so hard and like, judgmental almost, because it is judgmental, when we say something's expensive, because it's all relative. Like if during COVID, this is, a horrible example, but during COVID, when people couldn't get milk and you went to the store and you had to pay $15 for a gallon of milk, if you had kids, that wasn't expensive anymore. You were happy to have it. But now people would say it's expensive too. So you see how relevant it is?
Yeah. I spent $15 on a thing of raw cream in California when I was there recently.
Yeah.
But I was like, worth it because I was on the hunt for raw cream. And when I found it, I was so excited. It was from a local farm. And I was so excited. But I'm like, only I would see that and be like, yes, willing to pay
Yeah.
for that. But
Well,
it's
I remember
true.
that was on your stories. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I was fascinated by that.
Well, it's so funny because I love this conversation about expensive because some people might say that I have expensive tastes, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Which I think is relative maybe to like my income. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not living a super luxury lifestyle. However, relative to my income, I think I like to pay more money for things. Just
Mm-hmm.
say it that
You
way.
like nice products. That's the
Yeah.
thing. And you've always kind of looked for a reconciliation point between,
Yeah.
money and building wealth and the products.
It's so true. And what I'm seeing, which is kind of where this is leading when we talk about like expensiveness being relative,
Yeah.
it's also relative like someone with my same income or your same income could choose they place different values on things, right? So it's like for me, I don't even know how much my meat costs that I buy.
Yeah.
I just know where I get it. I get it locally sourced. They deliver it to a box. It's from Colorado. It's pasture
Mm-hmm.
raised. It's well maintained, happy farms, sustainable, whatever, all the words. I don't really know what that costs because the milk example, it's just what we do, right?
And it also has a health thing for you too, because you're not putting garbage in your body. So it goes beyond the dollar amount too.
Totally, right? Because my health is like,
Yeah.
and John even joked with me the other day. I cleaned out. I was doing a clean out of under my sink, and like, I haven't bought any skincare products in like 6 months because I was like, I'm on a mission to finish up all my skincare products before I buy new ones
Mm-hmm.
because I don't need to over consume, and I like very nice skincare products. And so I finally cleaned it out and I ordered like 3 new ones. And John looked at the bottles that I had cleaned out and cleared out. He's like, that's definitely your kryptonite. And then he paused. He said, well, it's one of your kryptonites. But it's like, health and wellness. And it had me thinking what we were talking about earlier is those are things I value. And so I will spend more money on those things. Things I don't value as much. I mean, I'm not totally sure where I have like lower standards, but like I don't buy a lot of clothing, for example.
Yeah.
When I do, it's from very specific brands that have a very specific like economic and environmental impact that I care about. But I'm not like a clothing person.
Yeah.
So that's not really going to be something that I'm spending a lot of money on. But we were talking how this like extrapolates out to like our standards, right? And what we're willing and not willing to accept in life, which is usually based on our values. And so,
Mm-hmm.
example for me, like I'm not gonna. I'd rather not eat meat than buy meat that's like a quality that I can't get behind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I can play that game like with how I travel with all these certain things. Like I'd rather not travel than stay somewhere that I really am uncomfortable in. Like I'd rather just be at home than stay like somewhere that's not going to support like my aesthetic and my energetic vibe. But how cool if we could also then apply that to money, because we've talked about this before, like I always have like have in the past like money's very separate from everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And like what if I could choose my money standards just like I choose my food standards in life?
You can, because they're one and the same. They're absolutely one and the same. So this is such a great question too. And I think this is going to be really helpful for the people who are listening here, because I know you have really spiritually connected, very empathetic people who really understand emotions. And so helping them sort of tie in money is like, oh my gosh, like help them call in more money, right? So I'll start with something that might be a little bit controversial in that I feel like there's a lot of information out there about how you can bring in more money to your life and sort of maybe even get on a different vibration with money by having a certain set of standards. And that would be, you see a lot of entrepreneurs who teach money and they're showing like, okay, I always do a private jet, or I'm always driving the Tesla or whatever. And look, I have no judgment for that, because whatever they're teaching, if it's resonating with someone and it's helping them, more power to you. But I think that we have to look at that. Number one, that's their standard. And number two, you can't actually call in more money based on a standard if it contains ego.
Good.
Yeah, because money neutrality is all based on unconditional states of being. So if that standard of that, I need that, we'll use your example, right? That meat that you're ordering, an unconditional side of it would be, this makes me feel so good. I feel so great about the world. I feel so great about the animals. Leave it there. If someone were to go to the level of they need to tell their neighbor what they're doing, and then they need to talk bad about other people who don't buy that meat, and they need to go out there and be an asshole about it,
Mm.
then I would say, no, that's not moving you towards money neutrality. And I think once we can step back as an observer and really start to see that, I think we're going to clear up a lot of bullshit around money, to be honest.
I love that so much because, and it totally gets the brain working, because it's like, yeah, what's the deeper why behind those desires? Like, even I was playing with numbers, what would be cool to be like my minimum that I quote unquote allow in my bank account, right? Like, just like what are like new minimums that I'm not used to? But asking that question, if you ask the mind just like goes to an answer. And usually, what do we know about the mind? It takes in data from elsewhere. And it's like, oh, okay, this person has this has this. So I have this, and this is what I need. And that doesn't answer the question from that spiritual, calm, neutral, like truth.
Doesn't. You're right. You're exactly right. It has to come from you, because your standard and your minimum, anytime, like even just an inkling of it that comes from someone else, then creates an impurity almost.
Mm.
And so our standards are not going to be pure at first. But the more that we can step back as an observer and see that they're not, and then question why, it's exactly what I was saying before. Like, money's just getting the blame. It's the emotion behind all the stuff that you're bringing in first. Then we're like, oh, money causes this. No, you're causing it because of your emotional relationship to it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't know if this is totally related, but I was reflecting back to when I first started being more intentional about the meat that I bought. Again, this is just a really easy example, but
Mm-hmm.
I do remember thinking like, oh, I have to make a choice because this is more expensive
Mm-hmm.
than I was paying. And is that cost worth the inner alignment that was calling me to make that decision?
Say that again? Is it worth more of the cost than the inner alignment?
Yeah, because I had this inner alignment of like I was desiring back when I first with the meat, like I was desiring a more sustainable meat, but
Yeah.
that was going to cost me more money. And
Oh,
at that point, I was afraid to spend the money
mm,
because it was more expensive. But I made that choice of following. So this is like an opposite way. Like I made a choice of following that alignment, what
mm-hmm.
that inner alignment brought me but it cost me more money. Now, though, it it's not a choice anymore because
Yeah.
it's just like, this is just how it is now. And I don't have
Yes,
to
you've
think about it.
normalized it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've normalized it, which is exactly the same going back to the example about money. When you said, oh, it's easy to make $100 a month, you can make choices that are going to normalize making $10,000 a month. And it's going to feel exactly the same as the $100 a month, which is exactly what the choice about the meat now feels.
Oh my gosh. That is so great. Yes. Yeah. And so it's normalizing it. And when things are normal, like I think about my daily life, like the things that are normal, guess what? I'm neutral about them. If
Yes.
I don't do the thing, I'm
Yeah.
not stressed. If I do it double times, I'm not like, ooh, I'm so amazing. It's just like, it's just is or it isn't, but it's not like this thing that I'm constantly thinking about or obsessing about.
Yes, exactly. And it frees up your energy because the real currency is energy. And
Mm.
so you're making money choices and you're talking about alignment and these standards and everything. These are all things that weave together that are ultimate what we're trying to do is buy back our energy. So it's your lack of split energy, your neutrality around money that is allowing that, and that's that stronger amount of frequency that is going out and bringing it back in. And as we move towards the future of money and this whole new way of working, I think that we're going to be more and more on board with how do we get our energy back? And investing is one of the ways, right? Because that's what actually is so funny, because investing actually buys your energy back, because then you don't have to go out and earn more dollars. But people see investing as like it's kind of what you talked about before, the oh my gosh, it's like over here, it's like the financial world or whatever.
Yeah. And that was one of the biggest things that shifted by going through the spiritual investor. Just like such a simple thing that I know had such a ripple effect is I I did completely shift how we invest, like how much we invest.
Hmm.
And it was like, so we started normalizing, like, even though like this year, I hope I'm going to get deeper into like very specific investments. All that, like, I really haven't, but I feel so at ease knowing that that's like an automatic thing. Like it's already happening. It's in alignment. It's like, I don't even look at the stock market. I don't even care what's going on with it because I have that trust partially from you. Um, I just know that it's all working for me and it's continually expanding. And if I can just be consistently like putting in the money and raising as I can the amount that we put in, like I'm like, we'll be taken care of. Like we will be taken care of.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because like that you're investing in solid, good companies. And as long as you keep putting money in, even some of those will end up being dogs and some of those will end up being fantastic. But net, the stock market, it always goes forward on a long-term basis. So the neutrality that you bring to it is exactly what's going to help grow the account, because we're not trying to micromanage something that effectively we can't micromanage.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
So here's something that I come up against is I feel like this deep trust and confidence in my future and my future money. Like I feel very secure in that. And where I tend to be riding a lot more waves and like have more charges that sneak up on me for sure is the present.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your take on that? Like the mind gets really stuck in the present on shoulds and what is and what isn't, and it gets a little rigid sometimes in the like the hard numbers or the reality of what it perceives.
So both of those things that you talked about, I mean, I know we label them future and you said present, but both of those things are literally concepts that are coming from your brain. You're just applying a timeline to it. So why is it that concept future is any different than concept present? What makes those different?
I trust myself more. I feel like I've set myself up really well for the future.
How does that tie in with trust?
Um, that's such a good question. It's like I feel like there's a like I trust the future of my money, but I
Why?
don't trust the present of it.
Why do you trust the future with your money?
I don't know, it's crazy, right? That's like the opposite. Because I know what's happening and like I have a vision of how it's growing and I know that I'm addressing it right now.
Is it because you're not micromanaging it, but you're micromanaging the present?
Yeah, I don't. That's true. I
Right.
don't look at the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's good.
So there's something there with that because I don't know, the word that you keep saying is trust. There's something there with, I guess it would be trust. You're not trusting yourself with the in the moment decisions, but yet you trust yourself that you've made the decisions and positioned the money and now it's going to be fine because it's almost like this other force. So what is it that's causing you to trust this other force outside of you more?
It seems bigger.
Well, then that is a big can of worms that you just opened. Yep. That's a
Yeah.
big one right there.
Mm. Yeah.
So you're blocking what's coming to you in the present moment if you think the future is bigger than
I
now.
can feel that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that like my body is telling me that truth too. Like I can feel it was like, oh. Um, this is, hello. Thank you, Elizabeth. Always. I benefit from these podcast interviews. So, with such an awareness, what is it like? What would that? Because I'm sure I'm not the only person who has that experience. So, what is one to do with this awareness?
With awareness that they are less powerful in the moment.
Hmm.
Well, I think it would be good to look at the things that you're not giving as much power to. I think if you could take it to almost like an example, then I think your mind could grasp onto it because I think that it is such a big concept. So, what is it if you were to pick something in your life that you think, okay, in the future? I mean, a lot of times people like think about like diet and nutrition. Okay, yeah, someday I'll have the perfect body, right? That type of thing. Like, what's causing that to seem more plausible than that right now?
Well, probably just because I'm investing in the future, right? So like I feel like I got that part really set up and then so it's like okay, that's handled. And then the blocking part comes with like willingness to receive more in the present.
Yeah. Well, okay, so is does it come down to receiving like expanding then? Because if you're saying that you feel good about investing, which I, by the way, is amazing, don't want to discourage that at all. But if you're saying that you feel good about the investing because it's a future thing, there's actually no difference in that thought other than you're applying a linear clock to it.
Mm.
And so what is causing you to not feel just as good about an investment today? Like, let's just say Oprah, who we called Oprah in,
Yep.
let's just say Oprah heard this podcast and she was like, Dana, you are the light, which is what I always say, because you are a light, seriously. And I think everyone can see that. She was like, Dana, you are a light. I want to publish your podcast and any other products that you do. Can we start right now? Would you not feel like that's big? Would you feel like
Yeah.
that's less than your future investing?
No, I would not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then your present is more attached to circumstances than your future is in your mind.
Yes, totally. Totally.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oprah. I like that. And actually, what you're reminding me too, which I think is so fun and I forget about too, is being more playful with the energy of money. I love the what if game because I think what happens to my mind, and maybe people who are listening can resonate as well, is they get really stuck in like what they see or what they don't see and
Mhm.
like what's possible. And it becomes really, you've said linear and like linear, slow growth, um, rigid. And
Yeah.
it's so much more fun and lighter. And like I can feel that like even in my body as I start remembering to be more playful and think of possibility, like that almost immediately starts to break down that resistance in the present.
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, right. There's so many freaking things that are possible in this world. Like, why get so stuck on like this one thing coming from in this one way?
Exactly. Which takes us back to frequency because the quantum field has infinite possibilities, it's infinite frequencies, and it's just about the one you're lining up with. So you would have done something in that moment to line up with the frequency of Oprah, had that if that happened. So then to back into that, then you would say, why am I not making a decision right now that could increase the probability that I would line up with Oprah? Why are we all doing that?
Yeah.
We
And
don't believe it.
yeah. And I imagine stepping into that frequency, like just getting yourself in that playful, energetic, that's, for me, playful is pretty neutral as well. Like
Yep.
I would associate like when I'm feeling playful, and it means I'm neutral because I'm not so attached to any outcome one way or the other.
Okay, so that's key for you then, because if you can have another state that actually somewhat equates to neutrality, because money neutrality means something to me, but it could be a different word for other people that gets you the same feeling, and that doesn't matter because it's a label.
Yeah. And
You
that's a
know,
good
fun is,
question.
playful is your money neutrality.
Yeah. And so the more I'm in that, which is, I'm like, this is hilarious because if I were listening back to this, I'd be like, Dana, you planned this, which I did not. Okay. Disclosure, this was not planned. None of this was planned. I feel like tears in my eyes though, because I am a projector. My signature is success. And our call to action most of the time with projectors is to play.
Wow.
The more play you have, the more success you have. Like that's like a teaching for projectors. I'm like, oh,
Wow. And so now you've just realized that that's actually money neutrality for you.
I'm
Wow.
dying over here.
Wow. So good, Dana. So good.
Oh my God. That's like, I'm like, I watched it like right before I had that realization. I watched it. I'm like, no, I promise I didn't just like, we did not play this. It's like you played that right into my hands. And it was like, oh, here we go.
Well, I'm a big believer that this information just comes through us anyways, you know. I mean, it's not mine, it's not yours. It's like here, it's like I think the universe is playing for sure, you know, with all of this. It
And
has to be. There's too many crazy things that happen, you know.
oh, and we pulled, so right before our call, everyone, I have this amazing card deck called Messages from Her.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled one and we pulled Oprah and her message is divine channel.
Isn't that funny?
And that's just what came through with all of this. So, okay. I
Yeah.
can't imagine anyone would listen to this and not want more from you because you just like even you can hear, I know everyone, you can hear this in her voice. Like she's Elizabeth, you're grounded. You even speak like with this like slow, steady, soothing, calm, grounded energy. And it's like that's how I see you with money, which is why I love our conversations because I feel like I can take some of that on and then be in that vibration. And everyone listening gets the benefit of being in that vibration as well. And if they want more, you are doing a workshop.
Yes, all about this. Really getting people into the feeling, right? Because we saw the benefit here of bypassing the concepts and getting into the feeling, which is why I want to do a live workshop with people. We did a similar workshop a year ago and we had a lot of success with it. And then we even published the replays and sort of repackaged that. And then people bought that and they were like, oh my gosh. And then they were getting transformation. So we're like, okay, let's just do this again. So, it's a good time. It's the start of the year. 2023 is definitely I feel like it's a calling in of money for so many people. I can already see on the horizon so many opportunities because we are changing so much. The money world is changing. So it's like, how can we get people in this feeling? And then also at the same time, introduce them to new possibilities, like you were talking about, a different frequency. Like, what are the different types of investing that you could do? You don't have to have $10,000. You can have, $50 or whatever. It's getting in that energy of it. And so it's we're gonna 90 minutes. We have a lot of people signed up for it, so I'm really, really excited for it. It's going to be a group kind of co-creation thing. I'm going to take you through exercises and all of that, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to be absolutely amazing. So it's on the 27th at 11 o'clock Pacific time.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's 90 minutes. It's going to be power packed, and so definitely if you sign up for it. Come ready. Come ready to get in the energy. I would suggest you get on the early bird pricing, because the early bird pricing, it's $88. I
Yep.
mean, that's like crazy. And so I think that goes until January 20th. But even after that, when it goes up to 111, if you're listening to that after that, I would say definitely see if you can get on board with it.
Yeah. And like, I think this is such a good practice of, if you're feeling that spark, like you're listening to this conversation, like, or you hear about this workshop and you're feeling that spark of like, ooh, this is interesting. Then my question for you is, what does neutrality feel like for you? And can you get yourself into that energy before you hit buy for the
Yeah,
workshop?
so good, Dana.
So,
So
like, you're plugging in and practicing that because it is an investment. I mean, Elizabeth, she's the spiritual investor, right? She really does focus a lot of the energy on investing and learning to. I mean, I never had a problem with investing in myself. That was like,
yes, yeah, but
right?
some people do.
Some
Yeah.
people do. And so learning to practice in these little ways of like, one single workshop or one of those, like, it's so fun to practice doing that for yourself and seeing what comes of it, right? Because it's creating that energetic vibration as you enter into the workshop, which is opening you up and contributing to the workshop, which is opening everyone up into what they're going to receive and expand into from that place.
Yes, I love the way you say that. You're exactly right. It's so funny because you and I were like on the same line here. Because like the podcast that came out today was kind of a predecessor, and I would say this. I'm going to send people to this. This is a predecessor to this workshop. As a matter of fact, I think it might even be better because it's like now we've got like the dynamic of you and I, right? The whole co-creation of it, which I love because it allows other people to see themselves. And if you guys who are listening to this, if you have felt yourself move forward in any way, try and like quantify that. Try and like put your finger on it before it runs away. Whether you need to go back and maybe pause this, like integrate whatever information came through for you right now, and literally like Dana said, like start embodying that and feeling that frequency between now and then, for sure.
And it's never too small.
Yeah.
Because like you said, even with our languaging and how we talk about it, all of these micro moments become macro. So it's like everything matters and nothing matters, right? Because it so you don't have to get tripped up if you do something that doesn't align, but also the more you do the things that are in alignment and bring you back to that energy, the more it will build on itself.
Yes. I love it.
Amazing. Thank you,
So good.
Elizabeth. And her workshop, I mean, and this is anything you do with Elizabeth, which is what I appreciate, especially as someone who's more of a less uh, strong mind and more of like an intuitive, I have to
Mhm.
feel it and like watch it and see it. Like conceptually, sometimes things don't land until I embody it and feel it. And I really appreciate that of everything you do, Elizabeth, is you bring us so many practices, right? Like whether it's breathing practices or yoga practices or meditation practices or just like energetic alignment practices that work with then the heavy hitting like here are the good stocks that are, that are going to be good to buy right now. Like, here's the very clear basics of getting into the stock market. Like, here's how you can create your early retirement plan. Like, so she merges the really practical, logical, strategic work with the energetics and the intuitive work. And that's what makes it so amazing. And that's what makes it so accessible to anyone who's feeling called to this. Because whether you're already super practical, like you said, Elizabeth, you couldn't have retired at age 39 if you only led practical. You had to step in to that part. Or if you're really spiritual, how many spiritual people do you know who have shit with money? Right?
Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
So you're hitting both angles, and I think it makes everyone more well-rounded, and you become this expander. Your energy becomes this expander for all of us. So don't miss out at the opportunity to work live with Elizabeth in this workshop. I will be there. I just know it's going to be magical.
Oh, thank you so much, Dana. Thank you so much for that, and for this, for everything. And the questions, your questions are magic.
Well, it's our energy. We work well together. And we'll put your show notes. I'll put the link for the workshop in the show notes, and then they can find your podcast. I'll link that.
Yes, the Spiritual Investor Podcast.
Spiritual Investor Podcast. So good. Yeah. And then on Instagram, what's your Instagram handle?
Just first and last name, Elizabeth Ralph.
Yeah. So we'll link all of that, and just go to the show notes or find her on Instagram, and the link to sign up for the workshop is in her bio as well. Yay. Right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tuning In podcast. As always, if this would resonate with anyone you know, please share the episode. You can follow along with my journey on Instagram at Dana_Evans, or find me on my website at alignful.com.